We head now to Arkansas, where tonight a convicted murderer named Liddell Lee has just been executed. He was scheduled to die at 7 p.m. local time. His execution was stayed twice before being carried out, just minutes before the warrant expired at midnight local time. That's 5 p.m. our time, so 12 minutes ago. Lee sat in a small cell a few metres from the death chamber, waiting as the court deliberated over his fate. He's been on death row since 1993. It was Arkansas's first execution since 2005. Arkansas's governor had originally signed off on 8 of them over an 11-day period, and public opinion in Arkansas supports the use of capital punishment. But none of those people know what it's really like, says Patrick Crain. He once ran death row in Arkansas before he simply couldn't take it any longer and left in 2007. And the man who formerly supported capital punishment now strongly opposes it and is calling for Arkansas and the US to end it full stop. His striking change of heart was brought about by seeing the condemned men at close range, although he tried not to become too close to any of them.
You know, it's difficult because you talk to these people every day and you become friendly with some of them because it's just a human thing to do, to be friendly with other people that treat you well. And so yeah, you want to keep a certain dispassion, and it's still difficult, especially with someone like Damien Echols that, at the time we were all well aware that he was going to be exonerated. And it still took another 4 years after I left for that to happen for him.
So he was absolutely innocent, full stop, and he was on death row.
Yep, that seems to be the case. And that's and seeing what most people on death row were actually like is what changed my mind about the death penalty. You know, there's so many of those people are profoundly mentally ill, or they're mentally slow or challenged in such a way as to, I really question their culpability as far as the crimes they're committed. See, there was a time in the United States, sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, in which the state government started cutting funds to mental hospitals. And what happens when a state government cuts funds to mental hospitals is you begin spending the money on prison cells. But you also now have a victim that wouldn't have existed had these people been, hospitalized prior to committing their crimes. So the state's going to spend the money either way, and the determination is: do you want to spend it on a prison cell and a victim, or do you just want to spend it on a hospital bed? And so that's really made open up prisons as essentially a replacement for mental hospitals. And that's left you with a lot of people on death row that frankly shouldn't have been allowed to be out to commit the crimes they did. I'm not a psychologist. I can't give you a definitive term, but I'd say around 2/3 of them were obviously profoundly mentally ill, even to a layman. And that doesn't mean that they met the legal standard of mental illness. I think the standard has something to do with, I'm not an attorney, but I believe it has something to do with, did they know the difference between right and wrong when they committed the crime? And you can be awful crazy, and a lawyer can still prove that you somehow know the difference between right and wrong. So, there's a real disconnect between the legal standards and actual, mental illness, and not just mental illness, but also people that are mentally slow or mentally challenged. And so that gives me a lot of concerns about the sort of people we use the death penalty on. It's unacceptable. And frankly, it's unnecessary. Having worked in the supermax, which is a hyper maximum security situation, I understand that they're not a threat to society anymore, and it's really no longer necessary for us to even have executions. And I'd like to see it done away with.
When you went into death row, when you went to work there, and I understand the financial imperatives, and I understand that jobs are. You take them, right? And you're the breadwinner at home and all of those things. But you also went in ideologically believing that the death penalty was acceptable. What changed your mind?
Well, I'd always had some questions as to the death penalty being Catholic, but I was in general okay with it, but because at the time I believed that it was, they only got guilty people and it was only evil people that got executed, and that was the narrative that I believed. But that wasn't what it was. That's I took the job because it's very poor in what's called the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah.
And it's very agrarian, and basically the choices are you can either work on a farm. At this time, it was on a farm for $50 a day, and they'll rent you a house at a good price, and it's usually a dump. And or you could go to work for the penitentiaries or work at a convenience store or something like that. And so the only way to really support a family down there is to get the best job you can and make the most money you can. And working on death row, being a sergeant at the Supermax paid the best. And I'd like to point out that officers in those situations, Arkansas is not a wealthy state, and that part of the state is even less wealthy than the rest. And officers who join execution teams in those situations, they're told they're volunteers, but when the warden comes around and they're asking for volunteers, and you have basically the only job that's capable of supporting the people you love, it's not really much of a choice now, is it? And that's another problem I'd like to talk about is how all of this affects the officers involved as well. Yeah. So that's what I have to say about that.
Patrick, I'm listening to you speak, and I read the article with you in The Intercept. In fact, we interviewed Crain about precisely that article yesterday, and I'm seeing you quoted far and wide in liberal newspapers. And the people who are responding most favourably to what you're saying are completely politically different from you. You are a lifelong Republican. You are from a conservative part of America, and yet you are speaking out in a way that people with whom you have not much in common are applauding. What do you make of all of this?
Ultimately, we have the same goal, whether we are conservative people or whether we're liberal people, and it's that we want to see everybody treated equally. It's that we want to see good and justice done. And we may have different ways of viewing the world, but because we have goals in common, it's entirely possible for us to work together to end something like the death penalty. We can both see, because we have the same ultimate goals, we can both see this is wrong. And what do we do when we know something is wrong? We stop it. We work to stop it. If you're a good person and you see something wrong, you work to stop it. And so I think it feels rather strange to spend so much time around people that are politically opposite of me. But we have the same goal. We have common cause. And I think shows like yours that bring attention, especially international attention to problems like this, and hopefully maybe we can, embarrass these people out of doing this. How much of this is really just a certain amount of revenge? How much of it, revenge is not justice. They're not the same thing. And I'd hate to think it, but, to be honest, I think politicians score political points, brownie points for themselves when they don't have to deal with the repercussions of carrying out these executions that the officers do, or that the families of the condemned do, or the families of the victims. It's a shame to see so much pain and so many problems or so much wrongdoing being done in the name of justice. I don't think we're achieving justice by having the death penalty anymore. I think it's just time for it to go. I think that's what civilized society should be doing now. We have the means to keep everyone safe from people who commit crimes. So the purpose of the death penalty to me no longer seems to be much more than revenge. Political point scoring for prosecutors and politicians, and it's time to end it.
Patrick Crain, who ran death row in Arkansas and is now, as you hear, vehemently opposed to the use of capital punishment. Arkansas has just conducted its first execution since 2005. Liddell Lee was pronounced dead at 11:59 p.m, which is 23 minutes ago. His execution warrant expired at midnight local time.